All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're looking at the life and legacy of Mahatma Gandhi,
Yeah.
a figure, I think,
Right.
who we all know, but maybe we don't all know the complexities of his life. And we're using quite a few of your sources for this one, including some excerpts from Gandhi's Wikipedia page, just to kind of get a sense of who he was and what impact he had, especially on India.
It's a fascinating journey, and it's not just like a straightforward path to sainthood. It's a guy who, really grappled with his own contradictions
Yeah.
and was constantly evolving in his thinking and actions.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it so interesting. You have to go beyond the kind of the icon and look at the nuances.
Yeah, yeah. I was really fascinated to learn, Gandhi, the father of a nation, was apparently quite the mischievous child, even known for twisting dogs' ears. I love those little details that just kind of humanize these figures.
Totally, totally. But, thinking about those early years, it's really the impact of traditional Indian stories that stand out. Like the tale of King Harishchandra, who's like the symbol of truth and integrity.
Oh, wow.
He was really fascinated by that. And he would always act it out as a kid, maybe observing those values even then.
Wow, yeah, like almost foreshadowing for his commitment to satya, or truth, which became so central to his philosophy later on.
Exactly, yeah.
But, of course, his path wasn't all childhood games. He had a pretty intense challenges early on in his life.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine being married at 13, losing your father at 16, and then experiencing the death of your first child. I mean, these are incredibly formative experiences and really shaped, I think, his worldview and maybe even pushed him to search for, deeper meaning.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, he journeys to South Africa. And I think reading about prejudice in history is one thing, but actually experiencing it firsthand, it must have been so incredibly powerful. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, that's where you really see the shift, from Gandhi the lawyer to Gandhi the activist.
Yeah.
Being thrown off a train because of his skin color, being called all these horrible names, like parasite or coolie, which was a common slur at the time. These weren't abstract concepts for him. This was his reality.
Right.
And so it really forced him to confront, the injustice of the time, like head on.
And this is really where we see satyagraha emerge,
Right.
Which is, we've all heard of it, but it's essentially his philosophy of nonviolent resistance.
Exactly.
I was really fascinated to learn that it was actually inspired by a Tamil moral text, the Tirukuta.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it really speaks to his ability to kind of synthesize ideas from all these different sources. But I think his time in South Africa wasn't just, about intellectual development. It was, his leadership was forged there. His commitment to justice really solidified. And his approach to resistance, the Satyagraha was truly refined. It was really a training ground for what lay ahead in India.
Wow. So Gandhi's return to India in 1915. I mean, it wasn't just a homecoming at that point.
Right.
This is a leader now with a growing international reputation stepping onto the world stage.
Yeah, he comes back to India under British rule, right?
Yeah.
Where there's already a big struggle for independence. But he's armed now with this powerful weapon, Satyagraha. He understands, I think, that true power isn't always about physical force. It's about tapping into the collective will and spirit of the people. And so he was ready to apply this in the fight for India's Swaraj, or self-rule.
And that's what led him to lead all these different movements, like the Champaran and Kita agitations, and of course, the Khilafat movement. And, each of these was targeted at a specific injustice, but they were all contributing to this larger goal of Indian independence. It's really fascinating to see how he brought all these seemingly very different struggles together.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, kind of the core concept driving all of this non-cooperation, which was this pretty revolutionary idea that he had outlined in his book, Swaraj. Essentially what he was saying is that by withdrawing, Indian cooperation from the British Raj, they could dismantle this power structure from within.
Well, yeah. It's like jujitsu almost.
Totally.
But amidst all these movements, there's this truly horrifying event that I think really deeply impacted Gandhi and really the entire fight for independence, the 1919 Amritsar massacre, also known as the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, when British troops opened fire on this peaceful gathering of unarmed Indians. It's horrifying.
Yeah, Absolutely. Tragic. Hundreds of people lost their lives. And it just really exposed, the brutality of the British Raj. It was this huge rallying cry, for the independence movement and a stark reminder of the human cost of oppression. But it also, solidified the need for freedom, right? Like,
yeah.
Out of this darkness.
Yeah, and it's against this backdrop that we see one of Gandhi's most iconic acts of nonviolent resistance, the Salt Satyagraha, also known as the Salt March.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, when I first learned about this, the idea that salt could be so revolutionary, it was baffling.
Yeah, I know, right?
What is this all about?
But it's a testament to his genius, I think. He recognized the power of symbolism and how something as basic as salt could be turned into this potent tool of resistance.
Yeah.
The British had imposed this salt tax, right, which was a real burden on especially the poorest Indians. And so by publicly making salt, he was directly challenging this unjust system. And it really galvanized the nation. I mean, this image of him, leading thousands of people on this 400-kilometer march to the sea to make salt. It's powerful.
It is. It really is. Talk about, masterclass in public action.
Totally.
And symbolism, to bring attention to your cause.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a local protest at that point. It captured the world's imagination.
Absolutely, yeah. The Salt Satyagraha, it wasn't just a protest. It really exposed the absurdity of the British salt tax.
Yeah.
And it brought so much support for Indian independence globally. It proved that nonviolent resistance could disrupt these unjust systems, and empower people.
Of course, this defiance, though, came with a price.
Yeah.
Gandhi was imprisoned numerous times.
Yeah.
But each time, it's like it just fueled the movement even more.
Right. He used his time in prison so productively, like refining his philosophy, inspiring his followers. And he really believed that suffering for a just cause was a form of purification, like showing your moral strength, against oppression.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked about, a lot of his key campaigns, but what about the kind of underlying principles that guided his actions?
Well, I think at the core of his philosophy were these 5 principles: Satya, truth; Ahimsa, nonviolence; Brahmacharya, celibacy; Asteya, non-stealing; and Aparigraha, non-attachment. These weren't just, abstract ideas. They were the foundation of his life, personal and political.
And yet, despite his widespread popularity, his nonviolent approach wasn't without its critics.
Yeah.
Figures like Jinnah and Ambedkar, for very different reasons, they questioned its effectiveness.
Yeah.
They even saw it as, detrimental to their causes.
Right. And it's such a crucial point because it really raises the question about, the limitations of nonviolence as a political strategy. Why did some people, especially those facing the most severe forms of oppression, why might they have found it, not enough?
Yeah. And then, of course, there's Churchill's infamous, labeling of Gandhi as a cunning huckster and aspiring dictator. Such strong words.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that even a man who preached nonviolence could provoke these incredibly strong reactions.
Totally.
Even animosity.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to how complex Gandhi's legacy is, right? And how his actions were interpreted, through all these different political and cultural lenses. Even today, the debates continue.
Right.
About the effectiveness of his tactics and his perceived shortcomings.
And we can't forget that while he was, he's advocating for nonviolence, Gandhi also believed that violence was preferable to cowardice, which is this kind of, perspective that I think is often overlooked.
Yeah.
And it reveals a much more nuanced philosophy than maybe we initially, think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It shows that he was a man of principle, but also, a pragmatist.
For sure. And I think, as we kind of go further into this deep dive, you'll see how those principles were really tested.
Right.
During one of the most turbulent periods in India's history. The partition of India and Pakistan. Yeah, the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. It was a devastating blow to Gandhi. He had strongly opposed this idea of dividing the country.
It's hard to imagine how he must have felt seeing this vision of a unified India just shattered.
Yeah.
The partition created these 2 separate nations along religious lines, which seems, looking back, it just seems so contradictory to everything that he stood for.
It definitely challenged his deeply held beliefs in unity and nonviolence. Think about it. While the world was celebrating India's independence, Gandhi chose to mark the day by fasting. and appealing for peace.
Wow.
Amidst all this, chaos and violence, it was a really poignant response.
Yeah, it's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
Instead of joining the celebrations, he's out there actively working to quell this violence and comfort those who had lost everything. It really shows his unwavering commitment to peace.
Yeah, his presence, his constant appeals for peace, they undoubtedly saved countless lives. It really shows that even in the midst of all this political upheaval, one person's moral compass can have a real impact.
Yeah. And tragically, it was this commitment to peace and unity that led to his assassination in 1948 by Mahatma Gandhi, a Hindu nationalist. It's a chilling reminder of the dangers faced by those who challenge extremism and intolerance.
Yeah, the world was shocked. Gandhi, the man who led India to freedom through nonviolent resistance, was killed by one of his own countrymen. It was a tragic end to a life that was so dedicated to peace.
It's really difficult to reconcile his death with his message. But as we've been discussing, his legacy is really complex.
Yeah.
There are those who criticize his tactics, his views on certain social issues, and his, perceived political compromises.
Yeah, and I think it's important to engage with those criticisms because it helps us to understand the full scope of his impact. Gandhi was a product of his time.
Right.
And we can acknowledge his flaws while also appreciating his monumental contributions to India and to the world.
And what's remarkable is how his message of nonviolence continues to resonate. Globally.
Huh.
Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela have cited him as this major influence in their own struggles for social justice. It's clear that his life and his work continue to inspire activists and peacemakers today.
Absolutely. That enduring legacy really speaks to the power of his ideas. He challenged us to imagine a world where dialogue and understanding could overcome conflict, where oppression could be met with this unwavering moral courage. And I think that message is perhaps even more relevant today.
So, we've really explored this multifaceted life.
Yeah.
This man who transformed from a lawyer to this global symbol of nonviolent resistance. We've delved into his principles, his campaigns, the complexities of his legacy. What does it all mean for us? How can we apply these lessons in our own lives?
That's a great question. I think what's striking is that Gandhi never claimed to be perfect. He was really open about his own flaws and doubts and struggles. And in a way, I think that honesty, that vulnerability, it makes his achievements even more inspiring. It shows us that greatness isn't about being flawless. It's about striving to be better, to live by your principles even when it's hard.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the historical narrative.
Yeah.
But for me, doing this deep dive, what's really stood out is Gandhi's human side.
Yeah.
Those little details we talked about, twisting the dog's ears as a kid, or even his very personal struggles with certain vows. It makes him so much more relatable,
Totally.
He wasn't just this distant florist icon.
Right.
He was a person figuring things out. Just like the rest of us.
It's true. He never claimed to be a saint. He was incredibly open about his flaws, and his process of learning and evolving. And that honesty, that willingness to be vulnerable, I think it makes his accomplishments even more impressive.
Yeah.
It shows that true growth comes from striving to be better, to align your actions with your principles, even when it's tough.
Right. And it's such a powerful message, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with these images of curated perfection.
Yeah.
It's like Gandhi's life reminds us that it's okay to be imperfect.
Yeah.
It's okay to make mistakes as long as we keep learning and growing. And he was always adapting. He was always reevaluating his methods.
Yeah, and that's a key takeaway, I think. He
Yeah.
constantly questioned his own beliefs and actions, never afraid to evolve or to admit he was wrong. True leadership isn't about rigidity. It's about being open to change and growth. And, connecting this to what you were asking earlier about how would Gandhi approach today's problems?
Right, yeah. Imagine Gandhi navigating our current political landscape.
Right.
Facing issues like climate change or social inequality, these escalating global conflicts. Would his methods of nonviolent resistance still be effective?
Yeah. Could he mobilize people, across borders?
Right.
Using truth and compassion to challenge systems of injustice? Or, would he need to adapt? Would he need to find new ways to connect in a world that often feels very driven by division and fear?
It's such a fascinating thing to think about, almost like a thought experiment. You know? what aspects of his approach might translate directly,
Yeah.
and what would need to evolve.
Yeah, and I don't think we can definitively answer that, but I think just engaging with those questions, applying his ideas to our own challenges is so valuable. It forces us to examine, our own choices and actions, to think critically about the world that we're shaping.
It's a call to action, I think. How can we how can we embody those principles of truth, nonviolence, compassion in our own lives?
Right.
Even in small ways, whether it's speaking out against injustice or choosing to live more sustainably or just simply being kind to those around us.
Yeah, and perhaps by engaging with Gandhi's legacy, grappling with his ideas and applying them to our own unique context, we can kind of contribute to this ripple effect of positive change and maybe even inspire others to join that journey toward a more just and compassionate world.
What stands out to you from this deep dive? What aspect of Gandhi's life or his philosophy resonates most strongly with you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring your curiosity.